A week ago, the Canadian economy and the Canadian real estate market were on the precipice of a collapse under the crushing weight of Donald Trump's tariffs. And then they went on pause. So now what? Hey there, and welcome back to Prairie Real Estate. My name is Matthew Fife, a real estate agent in Regina, Saskatchewan. That is my trusted assistant, Matilda. This is the weekly news recap, getting you up to speed on what was newsworthy in the Canadian real estate market this past week. We'll be talking about Trump tariffs again, a BC real estate agent that got a massive fine for what they did to their clients, of course, the best mortgage interest rates for the week, and a whole bunch of other great topics. But we got to start off with another one of my terrible bad dad jokes. This one comes from my father-in-law, and he's really proud of this one. What did the buffalo say to his son when he dropped him off at school? Bye, son. If you have a terrible joke I can use in a future episode, put it in the comments below. Let's get into this week's Canadian real estate news. BC Realtor ordered to pay $280,000 over repugnant misconduct. I thought last week when we talked about another BC real estate agent forcing their client to sell their house against their wishes was the worst story I'd ever read, and then I read this one. I almost think we need a leaderboard and we'd have this week dethroning last week's as the worst offenders. And if you haven't watched that video, you should pause this one right now. I'll put a pop-up card. Check that video. I thought that was a disgusting act, and this one is worse. This agent convinced their neighbor to invest $200,000 to buy a rental property in Kelowna.
Look, can I say it slow for you? Look, I need $5,000. Read my lips. $5,000 is what I need.
But instead, he took the money and used it to buy himself a house in Abbotsford and lived in it for a while before turning it into a rental property. If I told you about a really good investment opportunity I've got, send me $200,000. It'll make you a lot of money. This went all the way to the BC Supreme Court, and the ruling just came down at the end of January. And at the time of this article being written, not a single dollar had been paid back to the investors by this real estate agent. To have the $200,000 for this wonderful investment opportunity, the clients had to actually put a line of credit against their house and pull money from their own children's savings accounts. The court ruled that the agent must repay the original investment amount plus $42,000 in interest and $25,000 in punitive damages, totaling $286,000. And this isn't over for this real estate agent, because now the BC real estate regulator is going to step in and do their investigation, because it sure looks like this agent has broke all kinds of rules and they're gonna have a field day with this one. In a recent video, I talked about what happens when a real estate agent faces a complaint filed with the regulator. I used an example of my own case where I actually had a complaint filed against me to kind of walk you through potentially the agent is facing likely suspension of their license or termination entirely, and probably some fines to go along with it. So if you haven't watched that video, check that out. I'll put a pop-up card, and of course, it's always linked in the description below. Next, let's go through the Rentals.ca monthly rent report. Nationally, the average asking price according to Rentals.ca is about $2,100, down 4.5% year over year. It is down to about 2023 rent prices. It is up almost 20% from where rent prices bottomed out recently in 2020. And I'm hearing anecdotally, especially in Toronto and Vancouver, downtown condos, those landlords are offering some pretty sweet deals, 2-3 months free rent, utilities included, whatever it may be. So if you're looking to rent right now, do some shop around, you might get a couple of months free. Let's look quickly at some of the major cities across Canada, from most expensive to least expensive to rent in Canada, what's been happening there. In Vancouver, prices are down 4 to 6%. In Toronto, they're down 6 to 8%. Victoria's down 1%. Halifax down 2 to 3%. Calgary, interesting enough, down 5 to 6%. Edmonton up 2 to 3%. Regina is up 1 to 4%. And Saskatoon is up 2 to 5%. And if you are sick of paying rent, well, just stop and buy a house instead. If you're moving to Regina or buying a house in Regina, I would be extremely happy to be your real estate agent. But if you are somewhere else in the country, don't worry, I can still help you out. I've got a great network of agents across the entire country, and you can look in the description of this video. There's gonna be a link to my calendar where you can book me in for an appointment. I'll give you a call, learn about what's important to you, and get you set up with a fantastic real estate agent so you can stop paying rent. Canada secures a 30-day pause on Trump tariffs. Yep. We got to talk about tariffs here. Right now, basically, everybody's running around with their hair on fire. Well, I guess except for me, talking and speculating about what's going to happen when these tariffs hit Canada. And right now, it's a whole lot of speculation. So let's kind of talk about it here for a second. This would be just a couple of things that could potentially happen and how that would impact the Canadian real estate market. If we have a weaker economy, well, the Bank of Canada's typical reaction is to drop interest rates. Now it actually lessen the impact for those coming up with mortgage renewals. They're going to be going from those ultra low rates. And if the Bank of Canada continues to drop rates, the bond market pushes fixed rates down even more, that actually will probably lessen some of the pain that those renewing their mortgages will actually feel. Then there's the other side of this. It could actually increase inflation because goods become more expensive in a trade war, and the Bank of Canada has to increase interest rates, which would not only hurt those coming up for renewal, but also those looking to buy, as those interest rates will now go up and probably discourage them from purchasing. And then on another flip side, if you somehow manage to have three sides to a coin, well, because goods are more expensive, then you would have less purchases. So maybe there wouldn't be as much inflation because people just don't spend as much money. And yes, very likely a long and protracted trade war would result in some very significant job losses. If you don't have a job, well, you're probably not also able to pay for your mortgage. That would have a very negative impact on the Canadian real estate market.
When I think about the biggest, most important economic policy this government, if re-elected, would move forward, you'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
Another potential is a very big psychological shock to the market. We've seen this before when you have big policy changes like the stress test or foreign buyer taxes in Vancouver and Toronto. It puts a big shock in the system. Nobody really kind of knows what's going on. Everybody just kind of puts things on pause. We saw prices drop fairly dramatically right after those big policy announcements. And then once everybody kind of starts getting a feel for what the actual policy is and what it's going to mean, then the market starts to pick back up again. So should tariffs be imposed, that initial shock to the system will probably be fairly dramatic. And it's going to take some time for everybody to kind of realize, okay, how is this going to impact me day to day? Right now, the way these tariffs are looking to be implemented is through an emergency powers mechanism. And Congress can overrule the president here. So even if Donald Trump wants to impose these tariffs, the US Congress could just say, no, we're not doing this. Probably the most important question, though, is how long does this go on should Canada and the United States get into a trade war, tariffing each other back and forth? If it all resolves itself in a matter of weeks, probably not a massive impact to the market. If this goes on for 2 or 3 years, absolutely, that's going to have a very serious impact on the economy and, of course, the Canadian real estate market. Let's go through this week's best mortgage interest rates. It was a roller coaster in the bond market, which means we have some interesting news when it comes to interest rates. Starting off with insurable mortgages, the best 3-year is through Radius, and it has a 3 in front of it, 3.99%, obviously a drop from last week. The best 5-year fixed is also through Radius, and it's also 3.99, obviously a drop from last week. I said in my 2025 prediction video, I thought we would see sub 4% mortgages from a major lender. We can chalk that one up as a correct prediction now. Looking at the 5-year variable, the best static is 4.6% through Manulife, unchanged, and the best 5-year variable adjustable rate mortgage, 4.25 through Manulife, also unchanged. Now let's take a look at uninsurable mortgage interest rates. The best 3-year, 4.54 through TD, that is a drop from last week. Best 5-year fixed, 4.64 from B2B, unchanged. Looking at variables, the best static, 4.65 through Scotiabank, unchanged. And the best adjustable is also 4.65 through B2B, and it's unchanged. Looking at the big 5 banks, their best 5-year fixed insurable rates, there was some shakeup in the leaderboard this week. CIBC dropped rates, sliding them into first place at 4.49%. Bank Montreal increased rates, sliding back down to second place at 4.52%. RBC at 4.59% was unchanged. Scotiabank at 4.69%, also unchanged. And TD coming in at fifth place, slight drop, 4.74%. The Canada 5-year bond went on an absolute roller coaster ride this week, the most movement I've seen in a week in a really long time, starting the week at 2.8%. Then the threat of tariffs pushes that all the way down to about 2.5%. Tariffs are averted. It climbs all the way back up to about 2.8%. And at the time of recording, we've actually dropped back down to 2.65%. I expect if we continue to see that Canada bond rate around this 2.6 to 2.8 range, we'll probably see another drop in fixed rates next week as well. Major lenders slow to roll out secondary suite refinancing program after launch. This program was originally launched back in December of 2024 by the government as a way to spur on the construction of basement suites and laneway suites in people's houses. Of course, it's very hard to finance these if you don't have any extra cash laying around. So what they offered was an ability to refinance your home up to 90%. Generally, you can only refinance up to 80%. So what exactly does that mean? Well, let's simplify it. You own your house outright. It costs $100,000, or that's the value. Generally, you can only pull up 80%, so $80,000 out of your house, then use that cash to, for example, build this basement suite. In this case here, the government is allowing you to withdraw up to 90% or $90,000. They're capping it at a $2 million valuation as well. This program was supposed to have launched January 15th, but almost none of the major lenders have actually started rolling this out because they're saying they don't really have any details from the government and CMHC how this is to be implemented. Shocking, the government has a big splashy announcement and then really doesn't have any details to follow up with it. Sounds awfully similar to the blueprints that still haven't arrived, or the first-time homebuyer incentive program that was delayed because details weren't provided, or the first-time home savings account that launched late for very similar reasons. As of recording, there's only RBC, National Bank, and Bank of Montreal offering this program. This is one of the pillars of the government's housing strategy to get more units built in Canada. And it's a fantastic program for the government. You pay all the costs to finance and build these suites, and they get to brag about all the units they created. Awesome deal. There, good. Uh-oh. Tilly's dreaming. And here is Matilda's question of the week.
Why do I need a pre-approval to buy a house?
Well, the quick answer is you don't. And the long answer is you should. Most real estate agents, myself included, before we start showing houses to buyers, want to ensure that they're a qualified buyer and want them to be pre-approved. Most sellers also put the onus on agents that they're only taking qualified buyers through their house. They don't want to be cleaning up their house and getting out to have an unqualified buyer trundle through their house. More than anything, it allows you to make sure that you are actually financially qualified to make a purchase. You've got the income documents, you've got the down payment saved up, you have the credit history and the credit score, all to qualify for that mortgage. And there isn't something in there that would actually prevent you from getting a mortgage. So you don't go out, find a house you love, make an offer on it, and then find out you're not actually qualified for a mortgage and have to let that house go.